Welcome to the Scientific Sense podcast, where we explore emerging ideas from science, policy, economics, and technology. My name is Gil Epen. We talk with world's leading academics and experts about their recent research or general areas of topical interest. Scientific Sense is an unstructured conversation with no agenda or preparation. We cover a wide variety of domains where new discoveries are made and new technologies are developed on a daily basis. We are most interested in how new ideas affect society and help educate the world how to pursue a rewarding and enjoyable life rooted in science, logic, and information. We seek knowledge without boundaries or constraints and provide unedited content of conversations with researchers and leaders who love what they do. A companion blog to this podcast can be found at scientificsense.com, and this podcast is available on over a dozen platforms and directly at scientificsense.net. If you have suggestions for topics, guests, and other ideas, please send them to info@scientificsense.com, and I can be reached at gil@epen.info. My guest today is Professor Raghuram Iyengar, who is a professor of marketing at the Wharton School and faculty director of Wharton Customer Analytics, focusing on the practice of data-driven business decision-making. Professor Iyengar's research interests are in the area of pricing and social networks, and his teaching interests are in market research and analytics. In the area of pricing, his work focuses on the impact of multi-part pricing schemes on consumer response. Welcome, Raghu.
Thank you for having me here.
So I want to start with one of your recent papers entitled The Impact of Subscription Programs on Customer Purchases. And in this paper, you examine the effect of adopting a subscription program like Amazon Prime on subsequent customer behavior using panel data from a company that launched a new subscription program. And I believe the data is coming from Asia.
Yes.
So you want to talk a bit about that paper?
Sure. So as you can imagine, many companies, especially in this pandemic world, post-pandemic world, have been really thinking very carefully about how to engage consumers.
Yeah.
Subscriptions are clearly one of the ways in which they can not just get consumers for the first time purchase, but hopefully they can have a recurring purchase as well. Mm-hmm. You may have looked at lots of news articles where, subscription numbers are going through the roof. Not surprising. Entertainment, for example, people are latching onto Netflix, Disney Plus, amazing numbers. Nobody wants to now go to the stores, or at least less people want to go to the stores.
Yeah.
So retail numbers are also high up in subscriptions. So clearly subscriptions are something that people are very interested in from a company point of view.
Right.
What this paper was looking at what is the impact of these subscriptions? And the reason why this question is interesting is if you think about it, when you're trying to look at the impact, one can sort of naively look at what was happening before somebody became a subscriber and what happened afterwards.
Yeah.
That's a possibility. Right. But what's the problem there? The problem there, of course, is that these subscribers don't become subscribers by chance. Perhaps you can think about Amazon Prime or whatever the case might be, your favorite subscription.
Yeah.
You look at it, you look at your usage for a little while. You're saying, well, I'm buying a lot of things from it. Looks like it's quite good. Over time, you start buying more from it. And at some point, you say, you know what? It's probably better for me to become a subscriber. It's going to be some cost, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I would call self-selection, which is rather than the impact of the subscription, over time, people who became subscribers, well, they wanted to become one because it's probably good for them.
So they got some data, they got some historical data, and they made an informed decision.
Exactly. And many of us do that.
Yeah.
Where you're kind of seeing, and it probably goes both ways as well. At some point, you're on a subscription. Over time, you see yourself not using it.
Yeah.
At some point, you might say, look, it's not worth my while. So in that case, then if a company really wants to know what's the impact of the program that they have introduced, it's not sufficient to simply compare before versus after.
Right.
Because clearly you are, in some sense, putting two things together. One is the self-selection that we just talked about.
Yeah.
Together with the actual impact of the program. Ideally, what a company would like is that, somebody became a subscriber. Let's take Gil as an example. Gil became a subscriber. Not only was he buying something from us before, but the amount he's buying now, the variety of things he's buying now, all the other things have gone up. Why? Because he's become a subscriber. So it'll be great if the company can say that more conclusively than just self-selection.
Right. But there is always a selection bias in there somehow, right? So you need to remove that, or how do you think about that?
Very good point. So indeed, absolutely. So there's so what in a very simple way, one can think about the following. If I simply look at and I'll continue to take Gil as an example. I think it just makes it easier for people, perhaps your audience, to kind of relate to. Okay. So if I take Gil as an example, and I look at what he buys after becoming a member of a subscription versus before, it's comprised of two parts. One is what I call self-selection, so to speak, which is if I take Gil as a subscriber, clearly the reason he's subscribing is because he perhaps liked the subscription. So I somehow have to remove that part, so to speak, from the overall impact to then look at the causal impact.
Right.
And so to do that, I think I'll just explain it in a simple way, and then we can,
sure.
Tell me how much detail you want. We can go into that detail.
Yeah.
But in the simplest way, you can think about it the following. So the what we would ideally like to do is the following. Let's take Gil and let's take Raghu, two of us. Let's suppose both of us were non-subscribers in the beginning. Over time, Gil became a subscriber and Raghu did not. Now, that's a little bit step forward, which is now I can say, what was Gil doing before and after? And what was Raghu doing before and after? Why is that slightly better? Because now I'm comparing Gil to a non-subscriber.
Yeah.
But then, of course, it's still not enough because, Raghu and Gil are different people.
Right.
So how do I, in some sense, and that's where some of the machine learning part that we have in the paper comes in.
Yeah.
How do I, in some sense, compare apples to apples? And the idea, in some sense, is finding lookalikes.
Right.
For every Gil who became a member, can I find somebody who is just like Gil on many, many, many different dimensions? How much time has he spent with the company? How many products has he bought from the company? All of those things.
Yeah.
But for one key difference, did not become a subscriber. So in some sense, for every Gil, we're trying to find a non-subscriber who matches Gil on many dimensions. And that way we can find those lookalikes, so to speak, to then see what would have happened to Gil had he not become a subscriber and quote unquote take that difference away.
Okay, so it won't be a perfect match. So I guess this is where you use a generalized random forest approach to it. So essentially, you can pick from the sample and find a probability. I would imagine why that person is a match to the person that you're considering, right?
Very good point. So there are many ways to go about it. So you could have the propensity score model. That's what they call it, which is literally come up with a model, a bunch of different variables, and try to figure out what's the probability that somebody will become a subscriber versus not. The generalized random forest goes a little bit further in the sense that what I call as non-parametric, so to speak, in the sense that we don't have to rely on one particular model per se. And so don't make those assumptions. You simply, what you're trying to do is, and this is the easiest way to think about it, you simply go ahead and take all the variables. We had about 70 odd, for example, and I'll come back to that point. We had a lot of variables. And literally what you're doing is you're going down a tree. That's what they call it. Like a forest is a collection of trees. To go down a tree and at every branch, so to speak, figure out, is Gil and somebody else, are they the same on, let's say, the number of products? So say, yes. So let's go down that branch. Are they the same on the variety of products? Yes, let's go down that branch. And finally, what you're left with are people who are similar, so to speak, without even involving any model per se, on many, many dimensions. Now, there are two things to keep in mind. One is, of course, you must have a large number of non-subscribers because you're simply trying to find for every Gil, find out who are the people like Gil.
Right.
And it's going to be hard to find that if you don't have that many people who are non-subscribers. So that's number one.
Especially when you have 70 attributes in the data.
Exactly. That was the other point I was going to bring up. The more variables you want to put in, obviously larger sample that you want to have. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you kind of match subscriber to non-subscribers on as many attributes you can, and you look at their behavior post subscription, right? And and you're trying to find out. I guess there are different effects
Yeah.
that might be in the number, right?
Yes.
So what are those effects that you found?
So very good point. So the couple of things.
Yeah.
One is you can think of different what I call dependent variables as well, or things of managerial interest. So for instance, you could say, well, let's start with the simplest one, which is when somebody was spending before versus after, how much were they spending more? Was there a pattern in there? So we clearly find that while there is a peak in the beginning, like you can call it a novelty effect, whatever you want to call it, like there is indeed a bump. About 85% of that bump overall is explained by the actual impact, and 15% was the self-selection. So after accounting for the fact that people like Gil become subscribers because they like it, after taking that away, still about 85% of the effect is because of the subscription itself. So that's number one, which is, I think, good news for the company. That clearly the subscription is having an impact. The second thing that we also found was, again, good news for the company, was that even if we went beyond the first month, and then we took different time periods, we took like month 1, month 2 to 5, then 5 onwards, you still found a lingering impact even after about 5-6 months or so. So it looks like the subscription has a longer run impact beyond just the initial kind of novelty effect. People do indeed end up buying a lot more.
That's very interesting. So you have an example there, Amazon Prime, which is a pretty successful product. You say that members spend $1,300 per year.
Exactly.
Which is almost double their spending, right? Before subscription.
Yes. So I think there again, the reason why I think this example is interesting is, of course, and we don't know the internal details of Amazon. So exactly, I mean, this is obviously kind of the data that's available outside publicly. But even with that number, the fact that we would like to, I think, one thing to take away from that is, while indeed, when you look at the revenue side of things, it looks like non-members are spending almost half the members. But at the same time, the key thing to remember is the difference between members and non-members might be comprised of 2 parts, which is the self-selection and the true impact.
Right.
And so that's something to keep in mind, that it's very hard to say, did Amazon really cause people to buy double? That probably would be a very loaded statement.
So just my understanding, Raghu, so you say only 1/3 of the effect on customer purchases is due to the economic benefits. The customer is making an economic decision, and the other is just attributed to them becoming a member.
Very good point. And so a couple of things that we wanted to also look at. So for example, take any program, Amazon as an example, or even this company, the one that we worked with. Many of these programs are not just simply about economic benefits. Yes, they obviously they are a part of the program. But you take any program, it's about kind of taking your customers that you were interacting with before and perhaps giving them a more exclusive set of offers. So what you want your current customers to feel like is not just they got a good deal, so to speak, but they're part of an exclusive club. So there is something intangible, something more psychological. And so what we wanted to see was, of the total impact that we just discussed, which is the true impact, causal impact of the program, can we further decompose it? How much of that would be because of simply, quote unquote, getting better prices, better deals, so to speak? And how much is, quote unquote, remaining, which perhaps cannot be explained by changes in prices per se, but then it might be because of the structure of the program. So let me give you one example. In this example, or in this, and which is true for many, many programs as well, is one interesting feature of this was that, and this is, of course, idiosyncratic to this company, is that they basically said, why don't you pay, quote unquote, $50 upfront to become a member, and we'll give you back a $50 gift card. So it's kind of interesting. You might wonder, like, why are they doing that? It's like, give $50, get $50. In some sense, it's kind of like net zero. It's like, it's a little bit surprising. But if you think about it, and this is again just for your listeners, this program was in a cosmetics industry, which is very, very competitive. And so what the company wanted to literally do was, even though they're getting $50 and they're, quote unquote, giving back a $50 gift card, what they've actually done is kind of made your money non-fungible now. If you think about it, right? If you're going to buy from a company and you're saying, look, I've already paid $50 there and I've got this gift card sitting with me. So perhaps you're thinking in your mind, all the other things perhaps I was buying elsewhere, maybe I should buy in this company because I got a gift card now and I have a relationship with this company. So in some sense, this is what you would call like a sunk cost. You've already sunk that money in.
Yeah.
Might as well try and see if you can amortize that cost, so to speak.
Yeah, so the sunk cost fallacy, we'll get to that. But I also found another piece of information extremely interesting. So
please.
You say that 82% of Prime members shop with Amazon, even though the price is lower elsewhere, which is a fantastic number. So do you want to talk a bit about that?
Sure. Again, just to kind of ensure that this is obviously data that we didn't collect.
Sure.
It was actually a survey that was done externally. And I wish we could actually get internal Amazon data to be able to validate some of these numbers.
They won't let that one go.
Of course not. I have a joke that I tell people that, whenever you talk to anybody who works at Amazon, you look at their eyes, perhaps they want to say something, but they can't. So in that sense, these are the best we can do.
Yeah.
But indeed, I mean, the numbers there, and if you look at the retention rate that has been also speculated for Amazon Prime, it's amazing. Right. So clearly people are finding a lot of value. If you think about, again, those of us who might be Amazon Prime members, I think they clearly lower the hurdle in terms of ordering.
Yeah.
There are so many different things that you can get from one place.
Yeah.
It becomes easy in terms of shipping, all of those things. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why, you see that statistic where even though it's a slightly higher price somewhere else, the hurdle of perhaps, looking at shipping, the hurdle of coordinating that versus everything in one place, clearly there is a lot to be said for that.
Yeah. And then, as you mentioned, the sunk cost fallacy. So, sunk cost obviously is, this idea that after you have spent or invested some amount of money, you take that into account in your future decisions, even though business schools teach you that money is gone. You shouldn't be worried about that. Now, there is a qualitative aspect to this sunk cost fallacy also, Raghu. For example, we have Amazon Prime some years we don't. When we have Amazon Prime, we tend to watch the Amazon Prime movies, even though we have Netflix.
Of course.
So you want to talk a bit about, what the sunk cost fallacy is and how much it's really affecting the numbers?
No, I think, in our case, I think, you're absolutely right on the money in the sense that basically when you, you kind of pay upfront, in this case, of course, it was the $50 upfront. The findings that have been there, and there's a huge amount of work that Arkes and Bloomer and some of these, wonderful people who've done work in the past on sunk costs, what they found is that even though when you're going to make that decision, that money that has been sunk has been in the past. So you should make the incremental value cost trade-off at that point in time.
Yeah.
But as you were mentioning, people don't do that. They look at things that have been done in the past and then make that trade-off.
Right.
And so in that sense, what we find here and other people have also found is that, people kind of accumulate the use of the product or service after the upfront payment.
Yeah.
And they kind of justify it because they want to amortize that cost.
Right.
But the hope also is that it should become less salient as you keep using it, and the effect should wear off as well. And that's what we find as well, which is, things that are early on upfront, the more novel the thing is, you've already paid for it right now, you use it more, but over time, the usage also comes down because the saliency of that cost comes down as well.
Yeah. So one thing that went through my mind when I was reading your paper was, and I think you described this already, why not pay the customers to become members rather than asking them to pay for it, right?
Exactly.
So if there is sort of a club effect, so to speak, that induces purchasing behavior over a long period of time, it might be worthwhile for the company to actually say, we will pay you to become members, right?
Exactly. So I think in some sense, you think about it, where for this company and others like this, obviously this is not any idiosyncratic company by any means.
Yeah.
Many companies like this, what they've also discovered is in some sense, when you go ahead and pay for it, you as the customer, I mean, there is skin in the game, so to speak,
right.
Where you then kind of become more vested in it. You perhaps actively start thinking, and this is like the Costco membership, people have talked about it as well, where, once you become a member, you suddenly find that all the other things that perhaps you were buying elsewhere, you want to now accumulate in that trip to Costco because you want to kind of make use of the fact that you're now a member. There could be multiple reasons. One is obviously it's easier. Travel costs are less so. Another is that now you have access to a variety of products that perhaps you didn't have access to before. Mm-hmm. So there could be a variety of other things going on as well.
Yeah, I it might be quite small, Raghu, but I wondered, once you become a member and you get to know the firm in more detail,
Yeah.
then your search costs also go down a bit, right?
Absolutely. That's a great point. Actually, in our case, which, and I think that's a very, very good point to bring up, which is you can imagine the following, which was not true in our case, but I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
That you can imagine the following. Let's imagine any retailer. Let's not name anybody, but let's imagine any retailer you can think of. Perhaps if you become its member and you go ahead and let's think digitally for now. You become its member, you go and log in. Perhaps the web page that you see or the home page that you see as a member might be different from a non-member.
Right.
Because, you are provided exclusive benefits. You are provided different details for products. Perhaps there are some feature products that you have access to as a member that other people don't have. Perhaps the recommendation system is better for members as compared to non. All of those things are possible.
Yeah.
It so happened that in our case, the company that we were working with did not have this differentiation because the number of members they had accumulated were actually much smaller than its non-membership base. And so in that sense, on the one hand, while certainly this might be happening in other companies and other subscriptions, we were, counterintuitively as academics kind of happy that they were not changing anything because then we can sharply understand what was going on.
Right. Yeah, it would be interesting to look at a data set where the company had a subscription program and they took the subscription program away.
Yes.
What the effects of that?
Absolutely. Actually, if you talk about that, think about companies like Starbucks, for example, where they haven't taken away the program, but a few years ago and more so recently, they've actually changed certain aspects of the program. And so, for example, more recently what had happened was, and true for many other companies, they've been thinking very carefully, given the pandemic world, of how we can have contactless payment when we go to Starbucks. So traditionally, Starbucks, the way it was working was you took the app, you put money in it, you would get, I believe, for every $1 you spend, you get 2 stars or something like that. I don't remember the conversion rate exactly. But what they then did was, great, now that customers or people who are coming into Starbucks would like to use other options, let's say debit cards or credit cards, can we make that happen? They did, but you only get a single star for it. Right. So what they're trying to do is to still have the loyalty program, but give a slight edge to the members who are typically kind of doing it through their app, as opposed to people who are now doing it through other strategies.
Right. Yeah. So I want to, in conclusion of this paper, Raghu, I want to go through the 4 sort of questions you set out to answer. So the first one is, does the subscription program generate value for the firm? The answer to that is a yes for sure, right?
Yes.
And the next one is a subscription program effective in inducing customers to change their subsequent behavior because of the membership itself and or economic benefits associated with the program? And it's yes and yes, it sounds to me, right?
That is correct.
Economic benefits about 1/3 and the other 2/3 is
intangible.
Really the effect.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
And how does the effect, both total and net, vary across customers over time?
Yes.
Could you talk a bit about what you found?
Sure, certainly. And so I'll put a caveat also on point number 1, but we'll come to that later. But let me answer the question that you had. So typically what you would find, and what we find here as well, is that anytime you introduce a new feature, and this is not just true for subscriptions, true for many companies, even changing things, simple things like you change something on your website. What you might find is that there is a sudden increase in traffic, perhaps, or people using that. Why? Just simply novelty. Something has changed in the overall process. People like to try it out. So if subscriptions were only doing that, what you should have found perhaps is that there is a sharp increase when people become subscribers, but quickly the novelty goes away. But what we do find is that indeed there is a sharp increase, but the novelty starts dropping, not quickly enough. So that's good for the company. And over time, it actually settles down into an amount which is bigger than what they were buying before.
Right.
And so in that sense, there is a residual impact of the subscription much longer after they became subscribers.
Right. So the net present value for the company is a lot higher.
Exactly, a lot higher. The one caveat I'd like to put in here, which goes beyond the paper as well, and we are working on the next version of this paper. It's under review right now. So we'll bring up some of those aspects in that next version. And I'll be happy to send it to you if you're interested in looking at it. Is we also try to look at, and which is a very important point for the companies today, we started looking at the operations side of things, which is, this company, just like Amazon Prime that you mentioned and other companies, obviously one part of the subscription is free shipping.
Right.
And so you can imagine that, somebody became a member, they started buying a lot, but the frequency of their purchase, and this is what we find as well, sometimes becomes a lot more, but the amount they buy per time becomes a little bit less.
Right, right.
And the problem now from the company is that, we are making some money, but the cost of shipping is actually going up as well.
Right.
And so net, we are also trying to see, for example, apart from just the revenue side of things, what is the profitability side of things? And just quick results, we're still working through the details, is actually, not surprisingly, but somewhat surprisingly to this company, is that many customers actually are not profitable. They actually do not generate additional profit because the amount that they're buying versus the amount that the company has to spend on shipping actually goes up.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Raghu. So it's almost like the company has written sort of a free convenience option for the customer, and the customer is happily exercising it.
Exactly.
Which
Absolutely. So you can imagine now with the Amazon Prime numbers that we've been reading, the one that you brought up earlier, there are 2 points to bring up here. One was, of course, the self-selection that we brought up. The other one, of course, is that these are revenue numbers. They don't take into account the cost for Amazon to send out all those packages, to kind of do all the returns, all of those things as well.
Right, right. Yeah, it's really fascinating. Yeah, I would love to see the next version of this, Raghu. I want to jump into another paper that you have, which is entitled "Opinion Leadership and Social Contagion in New Product Diffusion."
Yeah.
And so this is, really thinking about key opinion leaders, what their what they say about your new product matters, how they are connected in the social networks matter. So what did you find in this paper?
Yeah, so this was a fascinating study with one of my colleagues, Christoph Vandenbulter, who is a member in my department, and Thomas Valenti, who is actually in the medical school in USC.
Yeah.
So it was very interesting. The way we went about it, just to give you a little bit of background, what was the idea for this paper? The idea was that we were working very closely with a pharmaceutical company. I can't name the company. We signed an agreement with them.
Sure.
But it's a very big company. They have lots and lots of different products. So we're working very closely with them in the following sense, that, they were coming out with a new product. They wanted to figure out, for example, who are the doctors who would, quote unquote, become good influencers for this product, in the sense that these are the people that should be first targeted, because if they start adopting the drug, prescribing it to their patients, hopefully because of word of mouth and the fact that they might be connected to other doctors, they might be able to spread how good this particular drug is to fight that particular disease.
Right.
Now, if you think about pharmaceutical companies, of course, they know a lot about these doctors already. You'd be amazed how much they know, because they've done their homework. They know, for example, that as any company should, the doctors are their quote unquote customers. They do a lot of background work, where a doctor has gone to school, are they solo practitioners, all kinds of things. So one thing that when we started working with them, which was kind of their interest, was that beyond all of the other things that we already know, for example, as what I call behavioral measures, so to speak, which is how much of competitive drugs are they already prescribing. We have demographic measures, like, where you went to school, all of that. We might have measures from scientific publications. We might have measures from which, bodies are you part of, which is, are you part of American Medical Association, all of those things. The one extra thing that we were thinking about, and we wanted to showcase how useful it is basically social networks, which is this idea that people are not, in vacuum. When even for doctors, even for people, quote unquote, who are experts, obviously they listen to each other. They try to learn from what's happening to other people's patients, and in how would they best perhaps treat their own patients. And so that was the idea for this, which is to understand, first of all, can we showcase that there is indeed this presence of social contagion, which is influence among doctors in this case? And how important is it when this company in this case is thinking about a new product that is diffusing through the marketplace?
Right. And so what you measured is the product success or the probability of engaging the KOL?
Very good point. So actually, let me, I'll tell you literally what we did. What we had was, and I think this is the best visual, that perhaps the way to describe it. Imagine a graph where each of the nodes are doctors. each of the links between them is whether these doctors know each other or not. Do they discuss things? And imagine on top of this graph, you have a drug that is quote unquote diffusing through it, where each doctor is deciding whether to prescribe this drug or not. And if they do prescribe, we know they have prescribed it. If they don't, we also know that.
Right.
And what we're trying to figure out then is, given this way of prescription versus not prescription, are there some doctors who are overly influential? And secondly, what would be the diffusion of this drug had they, quote unquote, not been as influential? So that's what we were trying to do.
Okay. So, in the pharma context, as you know, KOLs are used in many parts of the pharma R&D process, R&D and marketing process, right? So in discovery and clinical trials, you are really looking for technical expertise.
Exactly.
But post-approval, it's really a complex thing, right? So what the paper is really exploring is, correct me if I'm wrong, Raghu, a KOL that is more connected in a social network, in a social network, has more power in terms of diffusion of that information across the markets.
Very good point. So I think this became a little bit tricky, and there's a lot of work that people in marketing and other people obviously have done as well, which is, when you're trying to figure out whether there's actually social contagion or so many other factors that might be at work. For example, it could be the same salesperson that goes and talks to the same doctors. It could be so many other things going on. So that's where a lot of careful work went in, where we try to see whether can we conclusively say something about social contagion after, quote unquote, controlling for many other factors. But having said that, again, some part which is not in the paper, I'll give you a little blurb, which is a big aha moment for the company, was the following. Here's what we did. We basically said, okay, let's go ahead and plot, for example, what does the map of these doctors look like? When I say map of the doctors, it's, let's imagine you and I are doctors. And if we are connected to each other, there'll be a link between us. If we're not connected to each other, there'll be no link between us. So let's take the 3 cities that we were at, San Francisco, New York, LA. Those are the 3 cities. And we basically plotted, what does it look like? Now, some of the doctors who were super connected, which is many people were coming to them for discussion. Many people were coming to them for advice and so on and so forth. The company already knew about it. Obviously this was kind of like a sanity check.
Right.
It's like, if they had not popped up, there'd be something wrong in our research as opposed to their research.
Right.
Because they want to know, like all the doctors that we know who write in publications, who are part of these big conventions, all of that, of course they should show up. What was very interesting to the company was that we found some doctors who were, quote unquote, under the radar. These were people who were, quote unquote, not really going out and talking to too many patients. They were not that many. There were not that many people who were going to medical conventions, so on and so forth. What were they doing? They were very embedded in the community. So, for example, in the San Francisco community, we found some doctors who were top people that were mentioned in terms of discussion, but they were nowhere to be found in the company's own kind of ranking of how important they were.
Right.
And so one of the findings for the company that was useful for them was to think about the following, which is when we are trying to find out key opinion leaders, there might be multiple dimensions to think about. Of course, the number of patients you see, of course, whether you are part of a big kind of medical facility, you write in important publications, those are very important. But also somewhat important is how many people, quote unquote, are coming to you for discussion and advice, and how embedded you are in the community.
Right. Yeah, so, there is an analog here, Raghu. So we did some work actually in a large pharmaceutical company in the 90s in the human resource organizational context. So if you do the network that you described, what you find is that there are highly influencing, I should say, people in the organization that is not really correlated with their titles or how well they are known in the organization, but they are they have very high influence on the organization because they are really embedded into the organization. A lot of people come to them for advice and so on and so forth.
Absolutely. I think that is exactly what we find. I wish I could show you a picture, which is a very nice visual, but I'll give you a detail and I just can do the voiceover. What we had done was, and again, just for your audience, this particular disease that we're talking about was a little bit more prevalent in Asian Americans. And so when we looked at some of the doctors, they had Asian American last names because obviously they're part of the community, but they also had Anglo-Saxon last names because there are other kinds of doctors who are treating the same disease.
Right.
The doctor that I was mentioning, some of these people who are under the radar, in some sense, these were quote unquote bridges between the two communities.
I see.
There were a bunch of doctors who were Asian Americans, there were a bunch of doctors who were Anglo-Saxon, but a few doctors we found who were quote unquote connecting the two communities together.
Right. Yeah. So it's almost like there are two different networks there, and those bridges are going to be highly valuable. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And those were bridges, many of them again were people that were under the radar for this particular pharmaceutical company. Right. And for them, that was an eye opener. In that there are other ways in which you could measure key opinion leadership beyond the typical measures that they use.
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating. I want to talk a bit about a few other papers, Raghu. So one of them is the effect of price promotions on new customer acquisition for information goods.
Yes.
So we often see price promotions, right, with expectation that such a promotion will accumulate a large number of customers. So what did you find with that kind of a strategy?
Very good point. So this is work completely under progress now. So we're still working on a lot of details. Yeah. But basically what we are trying to see here is the following. There's a huge amount of work in marketing, especially, since scanner data, the AC Nielsen data came out in the 80s and early 90s, where what people have seen is, and not surprising, and I'm sure you and I can resonate with it, if you ever see a price promotion in a retail store, you say, yeah, that's a good price, let's go and get it.
Right.
But guess what happens? You might buy it one time, but after that, you're done.
Yeah.
And so what people have seen typically is in the grocery context that price promotions and people who are acquired through these promotions typically are cherry pickers.
Yeah.
These are people who are looking for a good deal. And typically their quote unquote long-term value may not be as good.
Right.
What we find here is a little bit of the opposite, which is people who came through a price promotion actually end up staying longer. They end up actually using the service a lot more.
Interesting.
And so what we are trying to figure out, and that's why it's under progress now, is what is the rationale behind it? Is it because of self-selection? Is it because of other kinds of things that they're looking for? One of the things that we find, for example, is, and this is a news portal where we can, let's think of like a New York Times. It's not New York Times, but think of it like New York Times, where you can perhaps, go in, look at some articles, but there's perhaps some things under a paywall. So what we can see is before people become subscribers, how many times do they hit a paywall? Right. And so that's a signal that they are perhaps, wanting to read some articles, but they can't. As soon as they see a price promotion and a dip, they decide this is the good time to go and get it. So they were already interested in the service.
Yeah.
So they're unlike those cherry pickers because they're coming to the website, they're coming in, consuming content, they're all quite interested, but perhaps the price is just too much for them to pay.
So the price promotion in this context, is that a perpetual thing?
Yes. So this is basically a perpetual price promotion where instead of paying $5 per month, they were paying about $2.50 per month for accessing the news articles.
Okay, so it's sort of, is it possible it's just a price elasticity or maybe a wrong pricing issue? Or
no, it could be, but I think what the company wanted to do, which was kind of nice. I mean, again, as academics, we always look for example, some experiments, quote unquote, quasi experiments the company may have done.
Yeah.
In this case, what happened was that for a particular week, they decided to lower the price only for that week, and it was not announced before. When was it ending was also not announced. And so what they wanted to see was that all the traffic that's coming onto the website, does a larger fraction of them change to become a subscriber? And if so, what happens to their kind of usage of that service over time? Right. So that's what we've been trying to use in some sense. And again, I don't think they, from the point of view of the company, when they thought about the price change, it's not, we worked very closely with them. I don't think it was very clear that they wanted to kind of, they settled on an optimal number per se. Yeah. What they simply wanted to see was that how, quote unquote, important is the price for these consumers to turn into subscribers, and can we get a little bit more for the buck?
Right.
And will these people last long enough such that they're actually profitable as well?
Right. And what you found was that they last long enough.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
And that's why it's a little bit surprising, because it's a little contrary to what typically people have found in price promotion in grocery products.
Yeah.
But as you point out, there are big differences in that. In the grocery products, the typical finding is for a one-time price promotion, versus here, obviously, it's a permanent shift in that you're getting a lower price for the subscription. But it's still not clear why, even if you've gotten a lower price, should you still be consuming a lot more still over time. So that's what we're trying to resolve as to what might be going on behind the scenes in terms of how these people came in, perhaps what their demographics was, were they looking for certain kinds of articles? That's why they got interested. That's what we're looking at.
Yeah, so you have another paper here, Raghu, which is sort of related, the perils of proactive churn prevention using plan recommendations, right? So, this is companies trying to prevent churn by essentially giving prospective customers or all customers better information as to what plan, for example, in cell phone usage, for example, what plan might be more optimum for them, right? But you find something potentially counterintuitive.
Absolutely. And I think, thank you for bringing up this paper. This was a wonderful collaboration with a colleague, Eva Escarza, who is now at Harvard, and Martin Kleiker, who was a PhD student at Columbia at that point in time. So what was interesting about this was the following, that, this was a time where I had done some work in cell phone plans. Eva had also done some work. And, we had built models historically where we are looking at, how consumers choose these plans and so on. Now, what had happened during this time when this paper was coming out and has still been happening is that many companies now have been thinking carefully about how can they help their customers perhaps choose better plans, because you can imagine, and there is what they call the bill shock bill, literally, where you open up, and this was a few years ago, when you open up your cell phone bill and you're like shocked, how did this happen? Where did I, because and the cell phone plans are so complex to figure out.
Yeah.
And so to that end, companies, proactively want to do something. So this company, again, I can't mention the name of the company because again, this company was thinking about a similar thing where they want to be proactive. They literally wanted to say, Raghu, for example, we're looking at your usage in the last few months. It looks like you're not on the right plan. Here's a better plan for you. Now you can imagine this is kind of good from the customer's point of view, because the customer might say, wow, the company's looking out for them. And this is so good. I was busy and I didn't know what else to do. And they've been looking out. Like, that's great. But on the other hand, this is what we want to explore here, is the following. That you may have what I call woken up a sleeping dog. Right? I mean, you kind of, you were going along, you were paying for the cell phone service, you were busy, whatever the case might be, it's going on. And suddenly the company pricks you, so to speak, to say, well, you didn't make the right decision. So, okay, thank you for letting me know. But now that I've woken up, I'm going to start exploring what is my right decision. And for many of these customers, it might be that the right decision is not with you at all. It might be with your competitor. And so that's the idea of, quote unquote, the perils of proactive churn prevention, where you might go ahead as a company wanting to actually do good for your customers by telling them that they perhaps can make a better decision. But the very fact that you've changed their habitual decision making, you put them in a decision making state now. And they can go ahead and start looking around and exploring. And that's kind of what we find, actually.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So essentially kind of teaching your customers to shop around may not be a good thing for the company.
But again, if you think about it, right, so there are two answers to that. We propose one answer, but what you're bringing up is another answer. So here's one answer we propose. So I remember the distinct conversation we had with the company once we kind of told them, look, this is what has happened. And so the conversation was like, what are you telling us? Like, should we never tell our customers anything? I was like, well, no, that's not true. And here's where I think a little bit of the experimentation that we had done, the A/B test, together with segmentation, so to speak, or machine learning, however you want to call it, comes in, which is you have to figure out who are the right customers to poke.
That's right. Yeah.
And so in some sense, any campaign that you think about, it should not be a mass campaign. Always think about who are the right customers. So that's one strategy. The other strategy, of course, is, and which many insurance companies actually do here in the US, is that, look, here's our rate. You go ahead and shop around. I'm sure you'll not find a better rate. If you do, we'll match it. So that's the other strategy. We didn't explore that strategy here. We kind of told them that for future campaigns, always keep thinking about what are the characteristics of customers that will best be resonating with that campaign, and try to go after those customers as opposed to, quote unquote, doing a mass campaign.
Right. So better segmentation and really identify the ones that might be profitable long term.
Absolutely.
So I want to close with another paper, Raghu, and I think this is quite interesting for us to think about in this political season too.
Yeah, sure.
And it's entitled Communication Channels and Word of Mouth, How the Medium Shapes the Message.
Yes.
I want to talk about that?
Sure. And actually, this is work with my wonderful colleague, Jonah Berger, very prolific in this area.
Yeah.
He does a lot of work on persuasion, all of that. He has a new book out as well. So wonderful colleague, it was a pleasure to work with him. And the basic idea that we were trying to explore was, the following, which is obviously people share a lot of information with each other, and again, there's some statistics out there which sometimes might, sound counterintuitive, but if you think about it, they make sense, which is there's actually a lot more offline conversation than online conversations.
Right.
It sounds kind of counterintuitive because everybody thinks about Facebook and all of that, but you can think about the number of people you talk to offline.
Yeah.
They're typically a lot more. And so what we wanted to see was beyond just the talking, what people talk about, does it also change something?
Right.
And what we found was, it was kind of interesting. We started to think about, how would people, for example, when they are doing synchronous versus asynchronous conversations. So for example, written versus oral.
Right.
When you're writing something versus talking face to face, when you're writing something, you can take the time and effort to kind of think about things that people may find interesting.
Right.
When you're talking face to face, you're trying to quote unquote fill in the space, fill in the time.
Yes.
And what happens then is people talk about things that are just top of their mind. It may or may not be interesting to other people. And so very broadly, how you think about the kinds of characteristics of that medium.
Yeah.
And what message may resonate with what type of medium fundamentally changes the shape of that medium as well.
Interesting. Yeah. So would you say, Raghu, I don't know the statistics, but would you say we are on a path to higher and higher written communication compared to oral communication because of the spread of all the social media, or not?
Actually, it's very interesting. I mean, again, I don't know the statistics myself, but if you think about it, on the one hand, the answer may seem yes, because not just the social media. You think about all the reviews that you write on Amazon, all the other kind of the written communication.
Right.
On the other hand, the more recent kind of revival of not revival per se, but the more recent kind of emergence of video channels, where a lot of product placement is through short videos. So think about, obviously the more controversial one was TikTok, which recently happened. There are other ones as well, Instagram, all of those things, where there might be a lot more visual representation as opposed to the written word. And so I think depending upon what channel you're using, what audience you're going to, and what is it that you're talking about, one or the other kind of medium may actually have a lot more resonance.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, it's almost like a 2x2 matrix, right?
Yeah.
So you have synchronous and asynchronous on your x-axis.
Exactly.
And you have audio and video on the y-axis.
Exactly.
And we're going to have modalities in all four of those blocks.
Exactly. And you can expand it, the synchronous, asynchronous. Obviously, I think that is the right characterization on one of the axes. The other one obviously changes over time, which is you can think about, a few years ago, it was about the written word. Before that, perhaps it could be something else. And as people are taking phone calls, I don't think many people don't take phone calls anymore. It's more about text. So as time goes on, obviously the medium may change. Right. But thinking about what medium and which type of message and whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, I think that's what we want to converge towards.
Right. Yeah, it's fascinating. So you mentioned you're working on second versions of a couple of papers, especially the subscription program. Do you know when that might be coming out?
Yeah, so we're actually working on the revision now.
Yeah.
One of the students I've been working with is on the job market now, so she's obviously a little bit busy with that. So we're hoping in the next few months, we've done all the analysis. The review team had been amazing. The journal that we've gone to, so they've suggested some, very kind of some analyses that I think will enhance the contribution of the paper. So we're working on that, trying to change also a little bit of the positioning. I think it'll have hopefully a lot more impact. So we're working on that part as well.
Excellent. Yeah, this has been great, Raghu. Thanks so much for spending time with me, and good luck with all your research in this area.
Thank you, Gil. This was a pleasure. And again, I think as more papers come along, I would love to forward it to you and get your feedback as well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.